January of 2021, I wrote and released an article about the Norwegian co-production of the American children's show Sesame Street, called Sesam Stasjon, which I then made into a video essay that I released on YouTube by April of that same year. It was fairly well received, and I even got a comment from the series producer and director Herman Gran on the original article, and he even shared it with some of his colleagues from the show on Facebook, and this guy shared it on Twitter. But after that, the video pretty much went dormant, slowly climbing to just over 10,000 views over the course of 3 years, until I decided to mess around with some of my titles and thumbnails in 2024. I was very happy with the thumbnail for this video, but checked out some of vidIQ's suggestions for title changes, and decided to change the title from The Norwegian Sesame Street to Norwegian Sesame Street Was Insane, which is a little hyperbolic, but I feel works. It was very different from the original show, but I did get some comments complaining that they felt the title was misleading. But the YouTube algorithm seemed to like it, because after a few months with slowly climbing stats, I suddenly had 1 week where the video got 100,000 views, which is huge for me. And the response was overwhelmingly positive, which is just a great feeling in general. Anyway, a few weeks went by and I was feeling great from finally having been monetized on YouTube after a few years of slow going. And the video was still getting more views than normal, even though it had slowed down massively. I then got a phone call from NRK journalist Turi Grønbæk. NRK stands for Norsk Rikskringkasting, basically Norwegian State Broadcasting, and is a government-run media company funded by taxpayer money, so pretty much the Norwegian version of the BBC. So Turi Grønbæk wanted to call me because she had seen my Sesam Stasjon video, and she was actually writing an article about lost Norwegian media in general, with the main focus being on older video games that were unavailable due to technological difficulties. But since my video was obviously related to lost Norwegian media, she wanted to talk to me. We eventually decided to meet for an interview when she was visiting Bergen from Oslo. A few weeks later, I met her at NRK's offices in Bergen. Since this was my first media interview, I wanted to set my best foot forward, and had done a lot of research about lost Norwegian media ahead of the interview, which I brought with me in a tattered notebook. The article mostly ended up boiling down the interview to "this guy likes one specific lost Norwegian television show, so let's use that as a springboard to talk about the issue," which is fine, but I do have all the notes I made ahead of the interview, so I figured I'd share it with you guys. And if I get enough examples of lost Norwegian media down in the comments, maybe I'll make a full video about the subject. The interview was very fun and enjoyable, and Turi Grønbæk was clearly very passionate about maintaining our cultural heritage. If no one in small countries watches over it, all we'll be left with in a few hundred years will be American and British media. I don't have a lot of experience being interviewed, but it probably helps when both parties are interested in the topic, and it was clear that this article was not simply something she had been assigned. She started off taking a few photos of me for the article while asking me about my memories of the show from when I was a kid. I told her that I, like everyone else, really liked Max Mekker, but I also remember as a child really shipping Alfa and Bjarne Betjent, as in I wanted them to be in a relationship together. Not sure if that was based on anything from the show or if I completely came up with it on my own, and it's pretty hard to check since it's lost media. I also shared a photo of myself as a probably 3.5-year-old kid visiting the shooting location for Sesam Stasjon, which I didn't know about when I made the original video, or I would have included it. It ended up in the article at least. I also mentioned how Sesam Stasjon music is actually easier to get a hold of than the episodes, due to CD and cassette releases. A lot of people still love Jeg digger deg, for instance. She then tried to get me to pinpoint why it is I find it troubling when media becomes unavailable, which was easier said than done. I feel that strongly, but putting it into words is difficult. I pretty much landed on it being a shame that so much time, resources and talent has been wasted by it not being available anymore. That and the fact that potentially anyone's favorite piece of media ever may be completely unavailable to them before they even have a chance to experience it. Since our main focus was on lost video games, I wanted to start by sharing my thoughts about that. One of the biggest Norwegian gaming successes ever, Flåklypa Grand Prix, based on the classic 1975 stop-motion movie called The Pinchcliffe Grand Prix in English, is no longer available. A remake with updated graphics was released in 2021, but only contains 9 of the 20 minigames from the original edition, which would not be a problem if the original game was available and you could make a choice about which one you wanted to play, but it's not. This is reflected in the game's Steam score, with a lot of people unhappy about the missing content. The availability of web browser games is a whole other can of worms. Sure, a lost Flash game may not be as bad as a missing novel or something, but I'd say it is comparable to a short poem. And when you start to think of it like that, imagine how many volumes of poem collections have been lost to time. A good resource to use when researching lost internet media is the Wayback Machine. Type in any URL there and you can choose from a variety of dates and years to see how the page looked at the time, even for websites no longer in use. Barely anything works though, but if you have the correct URL, at least you get to see it. That's how I got a hold of some of the visuals I'm about to use. First off is a sunflower game from the Norwegian SOS Children's Villages website, sol.no. Sol meaning sun, therefore a game where you were supposed to care for a sunflower in order for it to grow. It probably being an allegory for caring for children. It was super cute and both the sunflower and a helpful bee were voice acted. Now no footage remains of the game and barely a screenshot. Then we have 123spill.no, which a lot of teens my age found games on in junior high. The website didn't host any games themselves, only linking to popular games at the time elsewhere on the internet. So it's still possible to find some games I played through that website, but a lot of it is lost. Turi brings up this edgy game I remember playing a lot of at the time. A lot of these old lost pieces of media would need to come with a warning at the start if they were re-released today, including some episodes of Sesam Station. Speaking of television, NRK's online web TV archive is missing many episodes of even the shows that they do have available there. The older the episode, the less likely it is to be available, either because they have been lost or probably more likely to save space and bandwidth. I have experienced several times that it says on certain episodes and shows that they will be made available or unavailable by a certain date, so I'm sure there are technological limitations to keeping the full archive available for everyone at all times. But imagine what a resource that would be if they spent the time and money required to build up their system. Just for an historian, for instance, to be able to easily look up the news broadcast at any point in the past would just be an amazing tool. Also, programs created with taxpayer money should always remain available to the people that paid for them to be made, and their descendants. It belongs to all of us, and it shouldn't be up to NRK alone what we are allowed to see of it. But yes, NRK does have a wide cross-selection of shows available on their web TV platform, even if the episode count is incomplete. But if you try to find anything more obscure, you will quickly find absolutely nothing anywhere. The youth crime series Yggdrasil from Easter of 2002 has a Wikipedia page, but I can't even find a picture of the series, and it's certainly not on web TV. Not to mention any of the other series I half remember from my childhood that doesn't have a Wikipedia page to help me identify them. For shows that are simply lost and not just held up in copyright prison or have been deemed not important enough to be made available, there is actually still hope that they'll show up one day. Like the 9 lost Doctor Who episodes from the 1960s that were found in a storage locker in Nigeria in 2013. But it seems that I've come to the end of my notes. Some of these ideas ended up in the articles, some did not. But I'm very happy to have been included, and with such interesting company as the others Turi Grönbäck interviewed for this article. I've left a link to it down in the description where you can read it. If you don't understand Norwegian, just translate it with one of the myriad of ways you can do that. But before you do that, please consider liking, commenting and subscribing. And if you're so inclined, I've set up a Patreon account ahead of my next video, which I'm hoping will do Sesam Station numbers with the amount of effort I put into it, but with my luck will just fizzle out at 200 views. Until then, leave a comment about some old pieces of media you miss, either because they are gone or just because you haven't had a chance to enjoy them lately, but probably specify if that's the case, just to avoid confusion. Alright, bye!